Good morning. Morning. I'm really glad to be back with you guys today. I was looking through my notes and realized it's probably been about a year since I was here sharing with you. But today we're going to start something a little bit new, something a little bit old. As I was here last time, we talked about grief. We get to talk about grief again. But we're going to be talking about navigating life in transition. And that's where we're going to start. So, as Debbie prayed for us today, yes, we are amazed by God. And He is with us and with us in these transitions. And sometimes we don't see Him, but we have an opportunity to work with Him through those. So a little bit about me. So back in 2007, I was sitting where you are. I was taking classes at an institution called GIEL. I'm excited and scared about what God had in store for me and my family as we pursued extra education to help people get the Bible in their own language. We were non-traditional students in our 30s, already with 4 young children. It was actually a fluke that we got involved in Bible translation. My husband liked Greek and Hebrew during seminary, and we knew that that must be a gift, and we knew that was from God, and we wanted to steward it well. So he quit his job as a pastor, and we sold everything, including our house, up in Illinois, and we wanted to see what God had for us next. We spent a year living across the street on Lectors and Sunset Acres, and he finished his applied linguistics certification in 20 weeks, which I don't think they do that anymore. 40 weeks now, right? My time at DIU was a mixed bag. As someone with a social work background, I didn't know how this all fit in. I cried myself through grammar class. I had a hard time processing phonology and phonetics. But I really enjoyed SLACA and cultural anthropology. But my time at DIU was not in vain, as it prepared me to understand Bible translators, the translation process, and the struggles on both. Then finally, a year and a half later, of just thinking, hey, maybe we should try this Bible translation thing, we landed in East Africa. It was there that I not only learned about living in a developing country, but I also learned that I needed to figure out how to process this new life in transition. I'd learned the hard way. As I did learn, there were actually stages that need to be done, and some of those aren't so fun. So since I've had to learn it the hard way and had an opportunity to write and share about it the past few years, I thought it'd be really helpful to share with you the process before you head overseas. Unlike me and my family, so you can be aware and have an opportunity to normalize these stages and have tools before you head overseas. So I want to introduce you to the 3 stages. The first stage that we call restore, where we ask God to meet us where we are at. Then we will walk into a season of receive. In this stage, as we head overseas, we might be thinking as we're going there for one thing, but then we get there and we might need to reevaluate and find a new, renewed hope, renewed purpose. And then finally, there's rebuild, where we can live life out of being filled up instead of being running on empty. And each of these stages, there's different work to do, but we all have an opportunity to invite Jesus into the process. So this semester, we're going to unpack the first stage of Restore. So within Restore, we need to spend working through to see where we're at. So we're going to talk about grief. And then we're going to have an opportunity to practice laments. And then we're going to talk about forgiveness. So those are the whole 3 stages, part of the first stage. So today, we're going to focus on grief. So in grief, in America, we usually hear about grief only when it comes to someone that has died, which is a very important thing. My husband's grandfather passed away last few weeks ago, so we're dealing with grief in our family right now. But grief is an acute pain that accompanies loss. Because it is a reflection of what we love, it can feel all-encompassing. Grief is not limited to the loss of people, but when it follows the loss of a loved one, it may compound by feelings of guilt and confusion. And actually this week, we're working in a trauma healing training, and the participants are saying grief is hard and emotional work. The reason that we start here is because according to renowned Christian psychologist Dr. Diane Langberg, grief often profoundly impacts someone's faith. Loss and grief raise questions about God and his goodness and his trustworthiness. In grief, I have found that it actually opens up a place where Satan can play. As Christians, we're not immune to loss. And actually, as people who are living in transition, we're putting ourselves in an additional risk for loss and grieving. So let's take a moment and look at these losses. There are different types of losses. The first losses are external losses. These losses we might see as a death, a job, or health. But what I see specifically to transition loss are those internal losses that can come up to the surface, but maybe not in the ways that we normally think. Those are unmet expectations, regret, and loss of identity. As I started earlier, the reason we are here today is because I want to give you a tool to process these losses. Because every loss needs to be grieved, because the pain of these losses are going to come out in either a healthy or unhealthy way. And we want to help you have a good grief outlet. So my first question we need to consider is, how do I know, or how does grief show up? Does anybody know? Anger. Sadness. Withdrawal. Fatigue. Guilt. We're right. We see grief in our emotions and our behaviors. And today we're going to only have time to talk about one, so we're going to talk about our emotions. So we're going to get out a piece of paper and a pen, and Debbie has some papers and pens for you. And we're going to use this as a way to look at our losses. So I want to start with a familiar psalm. So I would like for you to close your eyes and repeat the verses out loud to Psalm 23. So the Lord is my shepherd, and I have all that I need. And repeat after me. And he lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths and brings honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. Because you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessing. Surely the goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life. And I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. So as you have your pieces of paper here, we're going to start with the first exercise in our book. In the book, we are going to look at loss. What are some, we've already named some of them, but I want you to think specifically about, I'm going to use COVID. You don't have to use COVID because last time I was here, I used COVID, but you might have something else that has come up since COVID of a loss. So as you think about it, what words from up here are you noticing that you're feeling? Can you read it? So as you look at these words, think about what would be underlying loss behind it. For example, if you picked fear, could the loss of security and stability be a part of that fear? So what's part of that fear? Or what's part of panic or shame? We only have 10 minutes left. So I will move on to the next slide. But first of all, as we take a look, there are many different grief models. One specifically was a ball in the box grief model, where they would take grief and they would take the ball and they would get smaller and smaller as the grief got smaller and smaller. However, what I was seeing was that there wasn't just one grief. So I made the blobs of loss grief model. So the blobs of loss grief model shows us that it isn't just one grief going on. There's lots of griefs going on, and they're all hitting each other, possibly hitting each other. So as we look through that grief model, what comes to mind? What are you noticing? Are you noticing that you only have one grief, one loss? Or do you have lots of different ones that are different sizes that are affecting how we're seeing the world right now? You can go back to the grief model. And I just want to sit there with it for a little bit. So I want to break you guys up into groups, or another person, and just spend some time talking about, has anything come up as you look at the grief models? So you can get together with somebody next to you, twos or threes, and notice. I'll give you a few minutes. I'll give you about 1 more minute. All right, why don't we bring it back together for our last few minutes together. Well, I don't want it to leave you just with this blobby loss feeling. So what I want you to do is to take one of those losses and see what it is that you can control in it. Can you control anything in it? Or Is it something that you can't really do? You know it's an issue, but you know that you just don't have the emotional capacity to deal with it right now. So just take one of them. An example I use is that I can control, if I'm sick, I can go to the doctor. But I can't always control my husband when he needs to go to the doctor. So as you can see, this is not a one and done blobs of loss. So there'll be times in our lives when we just have lots of emotions going on, and we need to spend some time in looking at them and understanding where they're coming from. And as we're on the field and we're doing that, sometimes we don't have the resources to be able to process that. So we're hoping that this will just give you one of the tools along the way on your journey in life, living life in transition. So that is what I have for you guys today, and I'll be back in a few weeks and we will talk about the next part of our stage, Restore. Laments.